everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. My name is Madison, and I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, joined by some of our community members, some 2020 fellows, 2021 fellows, and two special guests, which we will get to in just a moment. And tonight we are talking about working and learning. So everyone, once you see your name up on the screen, give a brief introduction and the 1 to 3 words that you associate with this topic and why.
Okay. Hey everyone, my name is Ashley. I am 17 from Vancouver, Washington. Working and learning. I guess I think about like personalized and relevant. And relevant to like, students' interests, to the real world. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Julia. I'm 23 years old. My 2 words would be experience, because I think with working and whatever you're learning, like whether the job that you're in does not appeal to you at all, you're still learning something and there's still growth to apply to your life within there. And also changes, just because long gone are the days of people staying at a corporate company for 30 years. Everyone, especially in Gen Z, has desire for new experiences constantly, and especially like with all the media that we're taking in and just a lot of different aspects. But the desire for new experiences pushes a lot of changes. And I think I saw a statistic that almost 2 out of 3 college students change their major at least once. And like 55%, I think, of high school students do not feel like they're ready to make a major choice going into college. So just even that applies to all the changes that goes into working world.
Hi everyone, my name is Zoe. I'm a high school senior in Lexington, Kentucky. The first word, I guess, is kind of a 3-word phrase, but project-based learning. I think you can hyphenate it and make it a word. And then the second one was vocational. I know that my high school district has like these like centers where like kids who aren't planning on going on a traditional college path can go and learn vocations. No one really knows a lot about it, and it's not a super well developed program, but I'm sure we'll talk more about that during our discussion.
Hi, I'm Leora. I'm 18 years old. I'm a high school senior from outside Boston, Massachusetts. The first, I guess, phrase that came to my mind was at odds. At least that's how it's been in my life. We're often working and learning like our butting heads, even if that's not how I think it should be.
Hey y'all, my name is Sid. I am a high school senior from the suburbs of Chicago. My 2 words, my first one is discovery. I think there should be more of a normalization of, if you're midway within your career path and you're like, I think I have something else in mind. I think that shouldn't be as taboo as it sometimes is. Like there is no one pathway. It should be just like a multitude of them if that's how you choose. And then my second one is definitely passion. I think it's really important to first, before anything, have something or a topic or a career path that you're very, very passionate about over money, even though money is obviously very important. In my mind, passion comes first.
Hi, my name is B. I'm 15. I think that working and learning are my 2 words that like immediately came to mind were difficult and crucial. I think it's really hard to learn, especially right now, just even in school, it's really hard to learn academically, but also learning to put yourself in new situations, learning new skills. Really anything right now especially is really difficult, but it's crucial. This is the time, especially as teens and like young adults, like this is when it's really important that we're learning and that we're working hard to continue to learn.
Hi. Similar to Leora, my first, I guess, 2 words were false dichotomy.
So we often think about these worlds of working and learning as being sort of opposed to one another, and our systems are actually built for them to be in opposition to one another, so that students have to make some sort of unfair trade-off between the two, when we actually know that they pair well together, very well, and are each of value, and of huge value to someone's life. And if I could throw in a third, lifelong, especially now when we look at sort of market futures, both in the job market and what jobs are going to be available and what skills people need to have. Reskilling and upskilling are two kind of hot buzzwords. And what they basically mean is that no longer can you just go to college and get sort of trained once and have that be your life, right? Industries are moving and shaking every single day and sort of reinventing themselves with each passing year, and you need a workforce that can adapt to those changes as well.
Said.
I'm on my like second or third or fourth or fifth one now that you all have taken all the good ones. I've got the two that come to mind. One for me is community. So I'm really interested in sort of, sorry?
Now you took mine, so I have to think of a new one.
Yeah. No, I'm really interested in kind of learning with a cohort and what it looks like to do work and to learn together with groups. So learning from each other, learning from coaches who are helping you along your path, and building kind of social capital and all kinds of networks that come with doing the work together instead of sort of being in a room by yourself doing it. So that's a big part of it for me. And then the other is creativity and sort of thinking about what you do when you get done with high school, or what you do when you finish your your second job. You're trying to figure out what you're going to do in your third job. Sort of thinking about what it is that's going to get you to where you want to go, and maybe that is kind of a traditional pathway, or maybe it's a different kind of pathway. But I think the combination of kind of technology, new kinds of programs, and new ways of learning things has really opened up a lot of possibilities for people who are trying to get from one point to the next.
That's great. I was going to say fun in community or enjoyable in community. So working and learning are both. I'm going to do something else because Thackston took it. I'm going to say should be meaningful. Should feel meaningful. So both work and learning should feel meaningful at every kind of step.
Yeah, similar, but I'm gonna put better together, just because I think, as Becca touched on, there's this common narrative that you learn and then you work, right? So like high school, college, and then you actually go on to the workforce, but really it's best when they're together and when they're super intertwined. I think about my experiences with CU. I have learned so much in the past couple of months that I've been really heavily leaning in, and it's just crazy to me, like way more than I could have expected to learn in a way larger time span in school or in any other educational institution. So yeah, now that we are done with the word association, we can go ahead and get started with the discussion. So does anyone have a question or a provocation that they want to pose? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna, coupled with the statistic that Thackston threw out earlier, which was excellent. I wanted to kind of give you something else to chew on, which is that 64% of college students are working, and 40% of them are working full-time. So they're in college, they're taking a part-time or full-time workload. Wow. And they're also working full-time. Almost half, and over half are working in some other capacity, maybe up to even 30 hours a week. So when we're thinking about the profile of college students today, and even high school students, even as young as middle school students, of what sort of their lives look like, how do our systems match or not match what students look like, and sort of what our needs are for them and what their needs are?
Becca, do you have any statistics on what the 40%, what kinds of jobs the 40% are doing?
mostly unrelated to their course of studies. The vast majority of students who are working are doing so in low-wage work, which is increasingly being eliminated. So youth unemployment rates, and when we talk about youth, it's your demographic here, it's ages 16 to 24. Youth unemployment rates have been steadily increasing over the past few decades, reasons being job elimination due to automation. We think about retail, we think about food service, a lot of these jobs that are not going to exist in another 10 to 20 years from now are the jobs that were traditionally occupied by a younger workforce. We also have an aging workforce without the skills needed to be able to sort of thrive in middle and high wage jobs. And so they're sort of taking over those other jobs that are available that young people typically had. And so what does that mean for young people who need to work while they're in school? Number one reason for college dropout is financial concerns. And what does that also mean for this sort of developmental experience that you have? My first job, I was 16, I worked at Target, and I learned a lot in my summer there, sort of doing retail, working on a team, having to clock in and clock out, managing my money for the first time, managing my time. And what happens when those experiences go away, and how can we bring them back, but also bring them back in a way that's related to what a person is actually interested in, right? What their career pathway could actually look like. That's what a lot of what Thackston's doing, which is amazing. And so that's sort of a general purview of what's going on right now, but
yeah, I can touch on that. So before college, I worked I had a real retail job, and then I had like a gymnastics coaching job. But in college, I worked 40 hours a week every year. And the first 2 years, it was mostly I worked at the campus gym, and I also did waitressing at a restaurant. And then like the last 2 years, I had like an internship in the morning. I'd go to we started at like 7. It was like 7 to 10, and then I would go to classes, and then I work at the gym in between classes, and then after I would do my waitressing job at night, which was crazy. And like all of my friends were like that as well. Like we all worked like 20 plus hours a week at least. But what I noticed most is I learned most through the working world, and like I learned most through my internships, and I learned most through waitressing, more than I honestly did throughout like my college courses, because it was kind of in one ear out the other, just memorizing stuff for an exam. So I think back to Zoe's point earlier, project-based learning and really like being invested day to day in what you are wanting to pursue career-wise is the best way to learn, because I majored in healthcare supply chain. Couldn't tell you a thing I learned in classes. I could tell you everything that I experienced throughout my internship. So that's just one thing to say.
Julia, can you talk a little bit more about why that is? What's the sort of why behind why you sort of recalled and were engaged and remembered all of the stuff that you were doing in the real world, and your school just didn't click?
I think it's just like the day-to-day, like you're working with other people on like an actual goal, like there's actual application to it, more than like in classes. It's just kind of in theory, not even in theory, it's kind of just like, oh, here's this Excel. My course load was like heavily like Excel based and such. And I don't know, I think it's just a completely different experience when you actually have a precise end goal and like something that you're trying to achieve in terms of actual impact.
And Becca, to answer your question, I think that we're doing the opposite of meeting students' needs. Like if you think about college, especially, tuition is increasing like at a very high rate. And so not only is that, but also students are having, the most low wage jobs, if not unpaid internships. And not only that, but now the low wage jobs that they did have are going away. So it's like the worst of both worlds for students and doing the exact opposite of what should be done, in my opinion.
I want to add another layer to all this, which is, through a lot of the work I do in my program is kind of looking at educational equity. So you kind of add the piece that for those students who can afford to go through college and don't have to work, what sort of opportunities they're able to pursue because they don't have to consider needing to earn a wage while they're doing it. And so this waged piece, not just having work, but having waged work and having waged work directly related to a student's interests, which is a lot of in the research I do on work-based learning, which is very similar to project-based learning, which is how I came to this love and topic. And now I look at modern youth apprenticeship programs. And a big core component of building an equity-centered model in whatever way it looks is paying a student for the work that they're doing. The sort of dignity of the wage, the equity and justice that comes with a wage really can't be understated. It's the surest way to sort of ensure equity in these programs.
Also, I want to touch on Thackston, your question earlier, like asking that you asked me. Also, so like not only you're working with people, but also in the working world, you're seeing how your decisions affect like other parts of the business, which in school you're only learning about, like I was in business school. So like I was only learning about my part of the business, and it's kind of, you know, not selfish in that way, but yeah, in a way. And when you're in the working world, you're seeing all aspects and how every decision you make affects a long line of people. Which is also really interesting and makes you think more about your work and care more about it.
One of the things that I want to throw in to the conversation to maybe make this a little bit more complicated, not that it's not complicated already, but to add some complexity. You know, the data and Becca, make sure I'm right on this, but like my understanding is that the data, there are a lot of positive correlations with having a college degree. It is still a really, really good thing in your life to have a college degree. And it's correlated with all kinds of not only, you know, sort of acquisition of wealth, but also positive health indicators, lots of stability, and the gap over time is pretty significant. And so part of the tension here, the answer is let's not blow up college. I don't think. But I think that there are a lot of elements about the pathways and the types of experiences that you get that Becca and Julia you've touched on and others have touched on that are related to sort of the quality and the caliber and the connections that come with all of those kinds of learning experiences, and that we have designed something that for a certain portion of the population works fine, but it's also missing out on a huge number of people who are incredibly talented, have deep potential, and with a different kind of path, actually can take advantage of as many opportunities as anyone else can. And so I do want, I as a college graduate, I think that it, there is an irony of me saying like, look, there's lots of other kinds of pathways that don't include college degrees. And one of the reasons why it's really important for me that I'm working on something in my own professional life that is connected to college is exactly that like, it shouldn't be, and this is what Becca, I think, is researching exactly, it shouldn't be that you have to either do work training or go to college, and it's like either or. So, but I do want to say that like getting a college degree is a really important thing in your life if you can do that and if you choose to do that. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us who are interested in this space to try and figure out how to better design things that sort of incorporate all the best of that, but also build in a lot of things that others have talked about being really valuable with work.
I will say that I think the biggest lie in the school system is that the only pathway to success is getting a four-year college degree. Schools are preparing 100% of our students to graduate and go to college, when in Southwest Washington, which is where I am, only 34% of jobs require a four-year college degree. So if you think about like that's like such a clear mismatch in what you're training students for and what opportunities will be available to them after they graduate, right? So that's just a really big gap. But I guess to me, like also the dichotomy between working and learning doesn't just exist after college, right? Like we see it in our high schools. When you talk about work-based learning and career and technical education, like students are either tracked into like, I guess just in my experiences and from what I've observed, like CTE gets such a bad rep from like teachers and parents and administrators as the pathway that students choose if they can't succeed in the four-year college degree one. And that is like, it discourages so many AP like and like honor students from gaining real world learning experiences in high school. And like it's, yeah, I don't know. Like I think that idea of like if you're high achieving, you're not working in high school, like is something that is perpetuated like very early on, and it doesn't just start in college.
And to add on what Ashley's saying, this is kind of something else that came up back when you were talking about like the importance of like equity and all of this too. Like Thackston, when you were talking about the like all of these kind of lifelong trends that we see with getting a college degree, I can't help but wonder like how much that's tied to like who's able to get through college, if that makes sense. Like we know disproportionately that population is wealthier, that population are not of people of color, and that could possibly like be conflated with the benefits of getting a college degree, that oh, these people live longer, they're healthier, but part of that could be like a lot of other kind of more systemic things that keep people from even getting through college in the first place. And I like, Ashley, what you were talking about with like CTE as well. It gets such a bad rap, but it's so important because like many of the measures, I know in my school, like it's either like you have to score this like score on an ACT or you have to do CTE, because there's just no way you'll be able to get through college. Like we're just going to kind of like float you that way because you have to be ready in one path and you're not ready if you don't get a certain score on an ACT. And so it makes me wonder how many kids get like redirected to CTE who maybe that's really not where they should be, or kids who just are naturally good at taking tests, but college isn't the right choice for them either. And like the measures that we're using to like tell kids what path they should go on. And I think possibly too, there's a way that kids can do a combination that we're not like totally exploring yet either.
I'm telling you, you all could have written the book that I just helped write. So you're hitting the nail on the head. Part of a case study that we built for the book was we went over to Germany. So Germany has this, you know, what is considered one of the gold standard apprenticeship systems in the world. So as early as, 14, 15 years old, students are tracked to, are you going to higher education? Are you going into some sort of what would be like a CTE equivalent, but it's apprenticeships. And they're mostly traditionally blue collar or handicrafts, and how we think about apprenticeships in the United States as well. But they're beginning to innovate and they're beginning to expand those fields. But when you look at who is in apprenticeships, and even worse, who's being disconnected from both because they're being tracked in a way early in life that they say, that's not what I want, or I could tell I'm not being valued by this system. It's minoritized communities, it's low income communities, it's the communities that have been sort of pushed to the margins, the Turkish, second generation Turkish students who were born in Germany, who speak the language, but the system looks at them like they don't belong there and they don't fit the narrative of college. And we wanted to go over there because people tout this system as being excellent, and in so many ways it is. But when you really peek under the hood, you start to unearth all these really critical inequities. And it's a concern in the United States for why a lot of these programs haven't taken off. The United States has this college for all belief right now, which is very important and actually quite unique. And we also are pitting that against this old school to work narrative and this sort of tracking. And so a lot of what I'm looking at is, what if you expanded what work-based learning looked like? Why must it only be in a blue collar industry? Why can't it be in business? Why can't it be in, tech or AI or healthcare? And why are we making students fit into these very small boxes to then pursue a college or career pathway, and then giving them no supports along the way to figure it out, which is something they actually do quite well over there, even though they track you very early. They give a student an exact blueprint. You want to get to point A to point B, this is how you do it. And here's 4 different ways to get there. And we'll pay you to do it while you work towards it. So, but you guys are all totally right. There's just so much complexity underneath there and a lot to consider.
Yeah, I actually did a year-long research study on work-based learning in 10th grade, and then I did an internship for a couple months where I was helping school districts like design work-based learning programs for students. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is just like teachers do not come from industry. Like teachers often do not come from industry. Like working and learning are like two very separate things. Like a lot of teachers literally like they get through high school, go to college, come back in the classroom. They've lived their entire lives in the classroom. Or like, and then if you're talking about like businesses and like employers, like they don't speak teaching, they don't speak student. And then so you have this disconnect where like school in the classroom and like business spaces like do not intersect at all, and so you need people to facilitate kind of these partnerships. And I feel like that's where a lot of like it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, like it just like does not happen on its own. But like yeah, but I definitely agree with you know, how do we make work-based learning like something that you know is attractive for the most talented students. And I guess like I've designed workplace learning experiences for myself, but it is not incentivized by school at all. Like by taking a workplace learning experience, I like voluntarily dropped my GPA, which impacted my class rank. And like that was just like a fact of it because you know like I need to take all AP classes to like maintain my weighted GPA, and work-based learning is not AP. And so it's like students right now are faced with trade-offs. Like you have to make trade-offs if you want to find any meaning in what you're doing in school. Like you have to give up something. And like if we want work-based learning to be kind of you know reality for more students, like we need to remove those opportunity costs.
Ashley, can I ask you a question about that? I love so much of what you're saying. It's super incisive and it's got my wheels spinning a lot. Tell me, what's the name of your high school?
Union High School.
Union High School. If you were the principal of Union High School, and you had a magic work-based learning wand that tomorrow you could basically make any change in the school with a relatively unlimited budget, not you know like you could, money was not the restraint. What would you be doing at your school to make it so that not only was it not a choice to have your GPA go down, but so that like people were sort of running to that opportunity to do that instead of sort of you know avoiding it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know if it's like something my like principal could do, just because I feel like so much of it is like I don't know, like wrapped up in like policy and like graduation requirements and just like how our schools are structured. Like I guess I don't know. I guess I look at like certain like so in Washington we have these like we have like big picture schools and schools that are doing work-based learning, and like their schools are literally like built next to like working spaces, and like the school is literally like just a co-working space where like students like hang out and learn and like work on real projects. And like I don't I don't know. I think if I was a principal, I would just try to either bring more community members and businesses into like onto school campus, because it's like it's hard for students to actually get out of the school campus just because of like transportation issues, and like that has a whole bunch of like inequity on its own. Like while I was doing the research, talked to a bunch of students who couldn't access CTE because district didn't pay for transportation. They couldn't like make it on site to work. But
Right.
yeah, probably just finding ways to like bring those two spaces like physically close together so people can actually engage in conversation.
Yeah, I love that, and it's an unfair question in some respects because you're sort of highlighting one of the biggest challenges in this space, and that is that it is systemic. And so one of the complexities of this, or at least I did something similar to you in sort of a year-long program to sort of learn and figure out what was going on in the space. And like, I think one of the takeaways is that you've got this sort of K-12 silo, this higher ed silo, and this employer silo. And it's really hard if you're in one of those silos to try and figure out how to build a solution for all three. Because you really do, there really is sort of this the split between the three. And so as a principal, it's really hard to think about what you could do. Though I think you're on the right path there with trying to figure out how to bring people in and kind of create those connections. But I think this is one of the things that takes it's going to be your all's generation that's going to be figuring out how to rebuild and reimagine and recreate this, because we've designed, as someone said earlier, we've kind of designed this structure where it's sort of you just go through in a certain direction, and really the world is not that direction anymore. It's going in lots of different angles and in circuitous routes and all kinds of things. And so it's a really good. I really appreciate how you answered that, and you kind of uncover some of the complexity in the work.
I want to add on to that, like this, and I love all the language you're speaking of, the silos and breaking down silos. Just the fact that you're all having this conversation, I'm so excited to be in a room with you guys having this conversation, because it's going to be such an invaluable skill in whatever career pathway you choose, to be able to think cross-sectorally. And when we think about work-based learning, a really integral part and an integral role is the role of an intermediary organization that is literally the translator between all of these different sectors. They're brokering relationships, they're managing stakeholders, they're deciding, okay, you need this, you need that, what's your proximity, how do we make this happen, never losing sight of who the students are and what the support that they need. But when we think about organizational change and managing change, really thinking outside the walls of whatever institution you're in is the first step. So the fact that you're all doing that right now is pretty cool. You're ahead of the curve.
This conversation is making me think of something that Leora sent me, a quote Leora sent me just an hour ago from Hamilton. If there's a fire you're trying to douse, you can't put it out from inside the house.
I think of that quote in rhyme. So, yeah.
I visited this tiny school district in West Texas called Roscoe Independent School District. I think the district, if I recall correctly, I think the district has like 200 students. The district. I think the town has like 600 or 700 people in it, or maybe 1,000. I don't know. It's very small. It's in basically farmland in West Texas. And the superintendent there has created a pre-K to 16 model in the town. And it's a big wind farm area. So there's wind farms everywhere, and the wind farms are generating money that are funding this project. But he has essentially created a pre-K to 16 model that is unbelievable. Like that everybody graduates from high school. You graduate from high school with an associate's degree. You're earning credit towards college, and then they're training people on how to be drone pilots, because the drones inspect the windmills. And they have a full veterinarian clinic on school grounds where the students are working with animals that people in the community are bringing into the clinic. It's a really sort of fascinating kind of outside the box model for how you start to connect up, as we were talking about, these kind of silos. but it's an example of sort of the, this is not going to be some like Washington, D.C. or your state capital driven solution. There are going to be policy levers that people need to pull that will change everything or change lots of things. But what's so amazing about this is that it really actually is about just creating amazing learning opportunities, hands-on learning opportunities where you're getting lots of feedback. You're working with small groups of people to sort of learn or build or create. You've got, as Julia, as you were talking about, sort of a really tight feedback loop where someone is like, no, that stinks. No, that's awesome. Keep doing that. No, stop doing that. Try this differently. You've got people who are helping you. That to me is like the sort of core where you start. And but there's a grassroots element to how to go create this that sort of fits perfectly into a CU ethos that that I feel like you all, the more you all are thinking about this, kind of to Becca's point, the more you all are thinking about this and trying to figure out how to build, the better for all of us. So
well said. Anyone have any another question or provocation?
I just wanted to tie on to that previous point. I really found that example very interesting. And I think a good way that we could kind of see this work-based learning play out is just getting involved in our local communities. I think there could be a mutual benefit in, exploring what your own town has to offer. I think, I remember in elementary school, we would sometimes visit different buildings and then they would tour us around. But after that, like in middle school and high school, I never really had those experiences because, that's when they get very academic based. And while that's fine to a degree, again, not everyone is on that path. Not everyone wants to do that. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know anything about what my local community does. I don't know what's going on because my school is always like, hey, you need to study, you need to do this or that, because college is that like main pathway. My school has this system, well, they used to when we had in-person learning, called like blended classes. So it was kind of like, practicing for college, where you would have a class a couple days a week. And as long as you were doing okay in the class, you would have about 2 days a week where you could do whatever you wanted. And I think we could have that system in place for much more classes, but then use those days where you're not doing anything to get out into your community and go into maybe a pathway that interests you and work at another place, and just see what you can learn from those. Like you don't need like a national organization to learn more. You can just start from your community and see if that assists you at all.
I love that because right now we're in a situation where our local businesses and restaurants and everything are crushed and they need help from people that, quite frankly, like, need the learning experience. So you don't have to pay them like a crazy amount of money. And you have young people that are very civically minded. And so they already care about bettering their communities. And I don't know, I just think it's smart, especially in areas where kids and parents can pick what schools they go to, that it keeps the school competitive if it provides meaningful work-based learning experiences for the kids, or basically like community systems change based learning experiences for kids.
I also think it's really difficult because I think some people kind of like have the incentive of like bettering their community so they can put it on their transcript, or like starting things just so they can get into college, and then once they're into college they're done, they're not going to work toward it anymore. And I think that's really hard, especially for people like if you're applying for something and you don't get in, but you genuinely want to work for it, and other people might just be doing it to put it on their transcript, like trying to be president of like student body or something because you want to make a change in your school, versus someone that just wants to have that on their application. I think that's really tough. And then I also wanted to share, I don't know if this like, I don't know. I just know that the Zuckerberg Institute is doing something called Teens Post-Pandemic Task Force. And it's about teens that want to make a difference in their community. And I think they work with like Randy Zuckerberg. And I just wanted to like put that out there because I think it's really cool how like these major corporations and like places like you can kind of have like established who you are. You can be out of college, you could be, you know, like Shawn Mendes, you know, like you could have like this great platform and you can be successful and wealthy and have people you love and people that love you and still work toward making your community better, even if you have it as best that you could have it, you know? Like I think that there's kind of a stop that people see of like once they have it where they've gotten into college and they're doing really well in their personal lives, they've kind of stopped caring for their community. That's at least what I've like kind of noticed, but I think that that's a really big problem that can be, I guess, solved. I don't know.
So that for me be kind of sparks, I guess, a question I've been kind of ruminating on, especially Ashley, you were talking about trade-offs. I guess wondering like what are like the specific like policies and incentives that keep like us being able like keep students from accessing like work-based learning like in a meaningful way. And I can answer that question personally because I, as a part of a Kentucky statewide group, did a lot of like traveling around the state and around the country doing presentations about like student voice, school climate, you know, all this great stuff. But I was marked truant because apparently meeting with your state commissioner of education is not an excused absence. You know, like we had to send pictures of our presentations, like, yes, attendance office, I was in Texas doing this presentation to school boards. And they're like, well, you didn't clear that with us like 3 business days before. Or, oh, well, yeah, we just can't count that. And I know that that affects a lot of students because like when you're truant, like the policies and things that affect you, like you lose your parking passes, that can, you know, you can get sent to court, they call your parents, and that's a lot of things that I think disproportionately affects students who are lower income. But it affects students at all, like kind of all levels, because it's something that like, you know, it's possible that colleges will see, wow, she had that many absences that weren't marked excused. Except, you know, I have something very specific that I was doing that day. But I guess just wondering what other kind of specific things are keeping students from accessing work while they're learning, especially the high school level where you have more kind of bureaucratic things working against you.
That is so interesting. I think it's also a matter of like personal work of like you were going to like, I think you said Texas, like you're doing all this like stuff for your community and the world. And I also think that there's like people whose personal lives, like I remember even in middle school, like having terrible mental health, being so sad and depressed and just not being able to take a day off of my work because I knew I would fall behind and get stuck in the cycle again of like being anxious and worried that I wouldn't get my schoolwork done if I missed a day. And the consequences are just so harsh for missing a day of school. And I think it's really tough that you can't even like even sick days or mental health days, like you can't really take them. And it's also the cycle, like you said, for people that are low income of like, how are you supposed to, you know, go to college or get a higher level of education or have a great transcript if you can't, if working, having a job to support yourself or your family is getting in the way of school? Like, why does education always have to come first if the other thing is, you know, basic survival?
Yeah, on that note, this is reminding me that my parents always reminded me that to be grateful that I'm not working, because then I can just study all the time. And so there's this like very explicit like privilege thing, like you are lucky, right, to be on one side of the dichotomy that they see it.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think, I mean, it's not even policy, right? It's just culture. Like there's a culture, de-emphasizing work-based learning experiences, perpetuated. I mean, like even perpetuated by teachers. Like I talked with like CTE teachers who like, you know, like knew that like other AP teachers like didn't respect them, and because of that, they were being treated badly within like the school staff community, which like really sucks. But also like I'd say you know just policy wise, I think it's anything that locks students like in a classroom, right? Like 188 days a year, like seat time requirements, like credit requirements. Like if you have to take like 2 art classes and you can't do your CTE class because of that. Like there's that, there's like school scheduling problems, like transportation issues. If you also look at like schools in rural communities, like they don't have access to these like to, yeah, to these like high skill, high wage like internship experiences. And like students, so I kind of live in this suburban area, but like the school district next door, like their students have to bus like 45 minutes to get to like their internship experience. And then they have to like bus 45 minutes back. And it like just takes, and like that's not possible for a lot of students. And so they're like automatically excluded based on where they live. Yeah, I don't know. I think there are definitely a lot of like just barriers for students to even do this.
You're right. We have a really interesting education system in the United States. It's both heavily decentralized, different everywhere. You know, you have one town, as Thackston said, that has built a pre-K through 16 system. And then you have a system like New York City that might as well be its own country. And at the same time, we need things to be systemized in some sort of way. Otherwise, you run into issues. We learned this from policies like No Child Left Behind about what incredible disparities exist within education, about who is achieving and who is not achieving being a really interesting metric, right? Like how are we measuring achievement? And who that is, and digging underneath the numbers in that kind of way. And that leads policymakers to be very, very risk averse when it comes to education specifically. When you think about what a kid has one shot at their time in school, do we want to be the ones to disrupt the system in the way that could be even worse than what we already have? And in that sense, the system, I always have to remind myself of when I think about, well, what are our outcomes and why do they look like this? Because the system was designed for those outcomes. So if we want different outcomes, then how do we have to make the system different? And where can we find pockets to innovate, to test ideas in a safe way, but also in a really impactful way, and then bring those ideas to scale? And that's sort of this multi-step, very long process that can be really hard because education also has a really short shelf life in terms of fads and new ideas, because people really easily slip back into their sort of status quo bias for fear that they're going to be kind of harming, I think, long-term lives of students. But when we look at the system right now, we've been at an inflection point for a long time, but we're at a real inflection point right now where we're seeing these disparities get bigger and bigger and bigger. Our system is working as it is, but it's broken for what we need it to be, in preparing students for jobs, in preparing students for a future, in giving them just a fair shot at life without barrier. And you guys are all kind of hitting the nail on the head in terms of like, we're all sitting in this room and we are on the same page. You know, most everyone I speak to is on the same page as us in this room. And yet it's about that sort of momentum and advocacy and organizing that needs to coincide with policy, that needs to coincide with different stakeholders coming to the table and saying, we need this too, which is beginning to happen right now, which is really exciting.
Becca, could I ask you a question? I was curious, just based on your research, because I think you've mentioned so many great ideas for how we can make work-based learning more accessible to a lot of people. So I guess I'm wondering, I guess, what is your a couple ideal scenarios or ideas that you have to make those more readily accessible while also keeping those uniform systems in place, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in incubating ideas wherever you can. And so, for example, a lot of my research right now is looking at a fairly new youth apprenticeship system in New York City called CareerWise New York. And it was sort of piggybacked off of a summer youth employment program, which is a government funded program in New York City that pulls in employers and employs students over the summer. And apprenticeships and youth apprenticeships in the United States are actually they've been around for a long time, but haven't been around in a sort of expanded web of industries. And so CareerWise, based off of a model, the same model in Colorado, said we want to incubate this in New York City, capitalizing on this period of time. We're thinking about economic justice, we're thinking about racial justice, we're thinking about community development. And they got a consortium of, name the company, Amazon, EY, JP Morgan Chase, et cetera, to sign on as business partners to say, we're going to give apprenticeships to high school students from Brooklyn in the South Bronx. They're going to spend 2 to 3 days a week in the classroom, 2 to 3 days a week at a job site, doing an apprenticeship paid in business management, in IT, in financial services. And it was this really, a lot of this happened this summer, but it was sort of this moment where you had all of these stakeholders at an inflection point saying, if we don't actively participate in what we want our workforce to look like, we're not going to get it, right? This is not just an education problem like we were talking about before. This is not just a college and post-secondary problem. This is a cross-sectoral crisis that we're confronting, where employers also aren't getting the talent that they need. And when you begin to read the room and the positionality and dynamics that are going on, you can say, okay, we have talent for you. They're in these high schools in the South Bronx. Let's help you get there. You pull in what I mentioned before, an intermediary organization, which can often be a nonprofit in the United States, to say, we're going to help you broker these relationships. We're going to help you translate across sectors in a way that you don't know how to do and build a program. And could it work anywhere else? We don't even know if it's going to work here yet, right? It's brand new. And then it becomes, okay, so how do we learn from this and pull it somewhere else? And the other thing about education, it's very context specific. But what really excites me about all of this work right now is that people are just going for it. People are actually willing to do it. And I think it's because we're sort of like at the cliff's edge right now, saying it's do or die. If we don't change things now, you're not going to get what you need, and we're not going to get what we need. So gives me hope. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, let me know.
If anyone has anything to add to any of the questions we've posed so far.
What's the last section? Remind me, the last part, Madison. What do we do next?
Yeah, so just a reflection. I'll send the notes in the Zoom chat and give everyone a minute to look over them so that we can kind of solidify what we learned.
I'll say just, are we going there now, or do we have like a minute?
I mean, if no one, does anyone have anything else to add to those two questions? Cool. Okay. Let me send this link. Give me a second, and then go ahead and I can write yours down. Okay.
No, I was gonna add to the last part of the conversation before we went to the reflection, but
yeah,
I'm happy to make it part of the reflection. It's all good.
No,
it's fine. No, go ahead. Sorry, I misunderstood.
No, I the only thing was a simple point, and that is sort of building on the CareerWise example. It's really easy to focus on schools and the education system as a sort of key driver for what needs to change. But the employers in this equation have just an enormous role to play in changing how people get into work. And there's a really wonderful organization that's in San Francisco, LA, and New York called Co-op Careers, that works with folks that are college graduates who are or underemployed and trying to figure out how to get into data analytics jobs or digital marketing jobs. And their entire model is based on this idea I mentioned at the beginning, but sort of building social capital for people who are in the program. So essentially, that's a technical term for just creating an awesome professional network of people who love you and will take care of you and will hire you and will advocate for you and will kick down doors for you because you'll do it for them. And my parting, I guess, thought in this section before we talk about the reflection is just that there is just, and I think you hear this all the time with CU, but there is enormous power in this room or in this Zoom chat. And and a lot of privilege that comes with that. And as the founder at Co-op has said to me a couple times, nepotism is actually can be a beautiful thing. The problem is that only certain people are using that nepotism to make decisions about jobs, and that like we need to be creating new systems and structures um, where people can build social capital and then use that as a way to hire people who have been overlooked or underrepresented for a really long time. And so I share that because this can sometimes, these conversations are always really rich, but they quickly get into these like high policy, public policy, like what do we do to like completely transform the system in the United States? And it can feel like it can get out of reach. And I just want to remind you that like what you're building at CU, like in 5 or 10 years, you all are going to be like, all right, I've got my own team in my startup and I need to hire someone. Who can I call from CU? Or someone will reach out to you and say, hey, I need someone who's just a whiz on building websites. And you'll think, who do I know from CU? And this is also what we need to be creating, is these kind of new sorts of digital networks of people who can open doors for each other and start to create different kinds of pathways into work as well. So just that's a final thought. I'll be quiet now, but that wanted to share that and point that out as well.
No, that was great. Thank you so much for adding. I sent the link in the chat so that you all can look over it. I can go ahead and get started with my reflection, just to tie together so much of what everyone has said, particularly a couple of points Becca brought up, thinking about how the education system meets the objectives that we originally set out for. And so it's kind of like we need to set new objectives, and everyone has an incentive to change those objectives, and then like as a result shape the way that the system works. And like kind of like I don't know, like it almost like there needs to be like an education 2.0, like so much of it needs to change to meet so many new needs. And also what Thackston pointed out, it's not just the government, it's not just policy. I think we have a huge tendency to lean on the idea that, oh, it will change and a lot of it is because of government, but this has just helped me realize how much of it is not, and how much of the power is really in the people's hands once we realize how much this is like across sectors and how many stakeholders there are in trying to solve this issue. And it kind of leaves me with the question of, with everything is changing, like what stays the same? Like what core skills or experiences do we want most, if not all, students to have? I think of things like a lot of stuff that I didn't learn in school, I know I will never use again, but something that I'm really grateful for is the like ability to write. So what other things like those should all students develop a decent like skill level of in order to serve them for the rest of their lives?
And I'll quickly add on to what Madison said in my reflection too. You kind of stole what I was going to say, exactly what Becca had said earlier, that like the education system is working exactly how we've designed it, that we keep like reverting to the status quo because that's exactly how it was designed. And that if we want students to really be able to get the most out of it, we have to start just getting rid of the barriers, because we have a lot of things like truancy and GPA and things like that we know aren't really like indicative of how good a student is or how high quality they are, but we box students into what they can and can't do based off of these very arbitrary measures. But I think with that though, because education is so hyper local, like every state does it differently, every district does it differently, it's different from school to school, that probably a lot of this change is really going to be grassroots. It's going to take a principal or a superintendent in a very small area to make change that really affects that community, and then for other districts to kind of model off of that. Because I mean, something that works in Kentucky is not going to work in Oklahoma because it's just a totally different education system. So I guess just empowering the people, like those people at the local leadership level, to really do that work, because right now there's just so much power that's taken out of the hands of teachers, principals, and superintendents, that if we want to see the education system change, we have to give them that power back.
I would say, I mean, another core component of the work that I do is that it's elevating the voices of young people. That we think about policies, and that policies miss a lot. Policies miss and are oftentimes very far removed from the actual lived experiences of young people moving through the system right now, here in time. So youth voice in policies and in advocacy is something that is gravely missing. And obviously being in this room with all of you is making me very inspired and excited. And I would say, and I know that you guys aren't shy to use your voices, but you absolutely can't be shy to use your voices. It's actually imperative that young people have a seat at the table and are a part of these conversations and about rethinking these systems, because you're living it right now. You're an expert in your own life. And we need to start integrating that more and more, I think, into our practice.
I was just thinking about my own educational experience. I went to public school, and for high school, I go to like a private Jewish high school where I've had the opportunity to do a lot of project-based learning. A class I was in last year was project-based, never work-based, but I'm thinking about how it took me to go to a private school to get that opportunity in the first place. And another thing I was thinking about was Northeastern is a school here, and they have this co-op program, which is a really fascinating thing that obviously relates to this in a lot of ways. And I know people who have gone through that like that. So if there's some way that there could be a type of co-op system in high school, that would be really interesting. But I think just thinking about my educational experience and how I can use what I've learned to change more things.
Yeah, I think the really big thing I'm taking away, and thank you, Thackston, for kind of just reminding us of this, but like there's like, yes, there's like a policy side to everything, but also like so much of it is just like good learning starts with like teachers and like students and people who are like closest to actually designing learning experiences. And like I just think about like how do we, because I think that social capital concept is also applied to like teachers and teachers and administrators, right? Like how do we get back to a culture where like, I don't know, we're asking young people to lean in on like real world like projects, like no matter how small, right? Like I think about like micro internships like at small businesses, or like even like, if like your friend's mom owns a local business and they need something, like how do we make it normal for, like your friend to bring that up and for someone to step in and help volunteer, and like, how do we like facilitate those types of interactions? I think like that's really interesting for me to think about.
On that note, this conversation really motivated me to continue thinking about how we use media, not like including YouTube, including TikTok, but perhaps especially something like Netflix, to tell the stories of schools, systems that are doing this well, and kids that are thriving because of their work-based, project-based, learning.
I think in general,
well, yeah, I mean, just quickly, like how do households decide what to talk about, right? It's like, Tiger King was the talk of the world for weeks. So we need this to be like a huge issue by making huge media productions for this.
I think just in general, something I'm taking away with this is that, like, clearly these opportunities need to be much more readily accessible. Like I am also thinking about my own school experience, and when we get to pick up classes every year. They're always, make a very big emphasis on academics, and they're like, oh yeah, you can do like an internship too, I guess, but it's barely there. I guess I didn't think I knew it existed until maybe my sophomore or junior year. I just didn't know they were there. Um, and so I'm really glad this conversation was brought up. I think there are definitely many ways that we can um, have these within schools and just take it from a local level first. As many people were saying, like, I think we need to just start like with talking to our districts, with talking to even our school's administration and just seeing what that system looks like. I think after this, I really want to talk to my school administration and just be like, hey, what does it look like for work-based learning in our school? Even though I know some things about it, I'm very curious, and just seeing how many school districts can take it just like step by step, and make this topic more well known to others. Because I think, we've just become acclimated to the system and just think like, oh, it's the only way. This is the only way we can do this, but that's clearly not the case. And so this topic really excited me.
Yes, Sid, I think that you bring up a great point. Like even for some schools, it's not that the opportunities aren't there, they're just extremely inaccessible. I think about VOTEC programs at my school. First of all, only juniors and seniors can do them. But because they take up like 4 credit slots, like 4 hours of your day, if you want to do it, you have to start planning when you're a freshman. So it's like you have to choose at this point in time. And there's just like so many other examples of that. But I think that was really a call out.
Yeah, like everyone else throughout this whole time, I was like, based on my own experiences, figuring out how working and learning went together. And I think the point I made earlier, I kind of put education in the way that at a point was just going in my ear, out the other. And that for college, it definitely was like that the first 2 years, but the last 2 years, like while I was having internships as well as learning, I started to, like in my classes, because I was actually applying them in my day-to-day life at the internship, like I was like, oh, I learned about this in a class last year, but I kind of forget it. I remember the word, but I forget it. But like going in classes forward, it was a different relationship because I knew that work experience. And I just, again, like I talked about earlier, knew all the different aspects of it and how it affects others. And I think a point, I forget which trek it was. We were talking about like the path of education, and Tanasi talked about how I think it was like 5th or 7th grade that like once the foundational basics are done of education, you get into the more niche topics is kind of when it does the in one ear out the other effect on you. But if there's a way after those foundational aspects of education where we start like beginning of high school, middle school, to prioritize work-based learning, I think it's going to be so much more impactful on kids because they have that real world experience in some way to apply it to.
Julie, you touched on something that reminded me that once I started to do like real world work, like every subject became way more meaningful. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't care about history at all when I was in high school. I didn't care about psychology. I didn't care really about a lot of subjects, right? Until I saw like it being used in the real world, even if in a small way. It's like, oh wow, like okay, now this is meaningful. I'm gonna start remembering it, right?
Yeah.
So there's this beautiful relationship between work and learning that you actually absorb the learning materials and experiences a lot more once you've had more work experience.
Yeah, because if it's just learning, you have a complete disconnect between the actual, just the whole application and real world. There's just no connection there, and it just goes right over your head. So,
just a couple quick reflections on all the awesome things that I've just heard in the last few minutes. I mean, one is, I wouldn't underestimate your ability to sort of build a project or proposal yourself that you can actually go work on. I mean, you can go pitch your principal. Ashley, I've got you on the track to go tell your principal what's up. But like, you can pitch your principal or your superintendent. But I mean, just like, create a syllabus for yourself of what you want to learn. What's the skill you want to learn? What's the experience you want to get? And it takes some work, but figure out how to you can sort of figure that out, how to do that on your own. And you know, whether you get credit for it or not, you'll be amazed at how positively people will react to the initiative of doing that. The second thing is just like, I spent a year looking at a lot of these programs, and this is an entrepreneurial space that is exploding. Like it is, like if you're interested in going to work on something, there's just so much space to try and create. It's really complicated, it's really messy, but it's so interesting, and like no one has figured out how to use technology in a meaningful way to solve a bunch of these problems. So if you're interested in technology and you're interested in work and you're interested in like learning and training, it's just such a cool moment to be doing it, as someone mentioned in the chat. And then the last thing I was going to say is just you know, I interviewed a bunch of learners who were going through these experiences, and sort of the theme that emerged for them was they had the very best learning experience they'd ever had in their lives in these programs. That they really struggled in high school, they really struggled in college, they just didn't like it. And then they had this experience that was really awesome. So if and when you go to a place where you're going to go build something, have that be your North Star. How do you make this be a place where people fall in love with the learning and with each other? I think similar to what you all are trying to create and have created at CU, and let that drive everything. Because that, if people have that experience and their hair is on fire with just like joy and learning, they'll never forget it, and they'll just come back over and over and over again. That's a really meaningful thing. And the last thing is I'm putting my LinkedIn in the chat. So putting social capital to work here. Everybody connect up with me, and if I can be helpful to you now, in the future, at any time, let me know.
Yeah, I think.
Like,
Oh, go ahead. Did someone say something or no?
if anyone wants to continue these conversations, if anyone just wants to chat, if you want to discuss pathways or anything, I mean, this was a wonderful conversation. So plug.
Yes, I totally agree. Sorry for interrupting you there. I just wanted to put in one last thing. Thackston, I think the first part of your reflection was kind of sad to me. The fact that you had to remind us that we could make proposals to kind of like make an education path that works for us, just because it just goes to show how many obstacles there are. Like I know like the amount of obstacles I had to go through just to take an AP class and some college classes were absolutely insane. So it's sad that you have to be reminded like, oh yeah, like, or that like the fact that you have to do so much in order to get some part of your education, or like even small parts customized and actually applicable to you. But yeah, this is really good. I've realized we've done a ton of treks on learning and education, but super relevant, and I really enjoyed this conversation as well. Thank you, Becca and Thackston, for joining us. Thank you, Sid, for joining us for the first time as well. And yeah, I hope to see you all at a future trek, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, thank